park was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder. Leaves rustled gently on the ground, birds hopped between branches, and a few early walkers moved along the winding path. Near the center of the park stood the old piano. Most people barely noticed it anymore. Its paint was chipped, a few keys were discolored, and the wooden bench beside it creaked if someone simply touched it. It looked like it had lived through many rainy seasons and too many summers. Some children had once tried to play it for fun, but even they got bored of the uneven sound. For the longest time, the piano simply sat there, ignored, waiting for someone who cared enough to touch its keys. That morning, as the sun pushed its way through light clouds, a man walked slowly toward the old piano. He wasn't dressed in anything special. His clothes were simple, maybe even a little worn out, but they were clean. He carried nothing with him, not a bag, not a phone in hand. Just quiet steps and a gentle expression. A small group of park-goers noticed him from a distance. They were sitting on a bench nearby, sharing a few snacks and chatting about their plans. When they saw him stepping toward the piano, someone let out a small laugh. Others followed with soft chuckles. "Is he really going to try playing that thing?" one of them whispered. Another shook their head, amused. It had been a long time since anyone had even touched the piano seriously. The idea of someone wanting to play it felt strange to them, almost funny. The man paused beside the piano and ran his fingers over the top, brushing away a thin layer of dust. He studied the keys as if seeing something deeper than their broken appearance. He looked around politely, not bothered by the curious eyes watching him. Then, in a calm voice that carried just enough to reach the people nearby, he asked, "Can I play that aged piano?" The question surprised the group. It sounded almost too formal, too gentle for such a simple request. Another person laughed quietly and said, "Go ahead, if it even works." Someone else muttered, "This should be interesting." No one said it to be cruel, at least not fully. But there was doubt in their voices. They didn't expect anything special. To them, he looked like someone who might press a few keys, make a strange noise, and walk away embarrassed. The man didn't react to their laughter. Instead, he gave a small smile, as if he understood more than anyone else there. He slowly pulled the bench back, and as expected, it let out a loud creak that made a few people snicker again. He sat down gently, taking a moment to settle. His hands rested on his lap, relaxed, patient. Around him, the park continued its quiet rhythm. A jogger slowed down to see what was happening. A child holding a balloon tugged at an adult's hand, pointing toward the piano. Even a dog, lying lazily on the grass, lifted its head for a moment before resting again. The man lifted his hands and placed them softly on the keys. His fingers looked practiced, though no one knew that yet. He pressed a single key, and a soft sound came out. Not perfect, not clear, but still warm enough to surprise the listeners. The group that had been laughing fell silent for a second. The man pressed another key, then another, testing the piano like someone greeting an old friend after a long time. There was something thoughtful in the way he touched the instrument. He didn't rush. He didn't seem nervous. He acted like he had been waiting for this moment for years. The park felt different now, as if holding its breath. Even the small breeze slowed down. The people who had laughed earlier looked at him with new curiosity. One of them leaned forward, as if trying to see his face more clearly. Another tilted their head, wondering whether the man had played before. They had expected awkward noise or random pressing of keys. Instead, they saw someone who looked comfortable, almost peaceful. He continued to test a few more keys, each one making a slightly different sound. The piano was far from perfect, and everyone knew it. But in his hands, even the broken notes didn't sound as bad. It was as if he knew how to bring out whatever little beauty the instrument still had. A woman with a stroller stopped nearby. She didn't say anything, but she waited, sensing something was about to happen. A teenager who had been scrolling on a phone paused to glance up. A man feeding birds nearby looked over his shoulder. The man at the piano took a slow breath. His shoulders relaxed, and his posture changed subtly, becoming more focused. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by quiet curiosity. Even the people who had doubted him now watched with the kind of interest that grows when something unexpected begins. He looked down at the keys, gently positioned his fingers, and for a moment he closed his eyes. This made the crowd grow even more curious. They had no idea what he was thinking. Maybe he was remembering something. Maybe he was imagining a melody. Or maybe he simply needed a second to feel ready. Whatever it was, that brief moment made everything feel more personal, more human. The sun finally broke through the thin clouds, shining lightly on the man's hands. The old piano reflected a faint glow, as if waking up. The man opened his eyes again. There was a new softness in them, a quiet determination mixed with a hint of something emotional. Before playing anything, he looked around at the people watching him. Not in anger, not in pride, just an honest, warm expression. No one could hear what was in his mind, but something about his face made a few people sit up straighter. It was the look of someone who had a story inside him, one that he hadn't spoken yet. He lowered his hands again, letting his fingers hover over the keys. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. More people stopped walking, drawn by the stillness in the air. A couple who had been arguing quietly paused their conversation. A cyclist slowed down and eventually stopped completely. The man pressed the first real note of his melody. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It wasn't perfect. But it was gentle, warm, and filled with something people couldn't describe. The sound spread softly across the park, making even the birds quiet down. The group that had laughed earlier sat frozen. Their expressions changed slowly from amusement to surprise. With each note, the man seemed to sink deeper into the melody. His fingers moved with ease, gliding over the keys in a natural, almost graceful way. The piano, despite its age, responded to him in a way it hadn't responded to anyone in years. A child tilted their head, confused by how nice it suddenly sounded. An older passerby whispered to no one in particular, "He knows what he's doing." Someone in the crowd folded their arms, trying to hide their growing interest. Another gently nudged the friend sitting next to them. The atmosphere changed completely. What had started as a moment of quiet teasing had turned into a moment of quiet awe. The man continued to play, shaping each note with care. His expression softened into something peaceful, like someone returning to a place they once loved. His body moved slightly with the rhythm, controlled and calm. The old piano's uneven tones blended into a melody that felt honest and full of heart. The laughter that had filled the air earlier was gone, replaced by something much better: respect, curiosity, and a sense of wonder. And this was only the beginning of what the park-goers were about to witness. The first notes from the old piano hung in the air like a soft breath, and the people around it felt the atmosphere shift. No one expected the sound to feel warm or calming, especially coming from something so worn out. Yet it did. The man's fingers moved slowly at first, almost testing the instrument, but with a gentleness that made every note feel intentional. The small crowd that had gathered leaned in without even realizing it. Some folded their arms, not wanting to look too interested. Others openly stared, surprised by how different the piano sounded in his hands. Even those who had laughed earlier found themselves quiet, unsure of what they were witnessing but unable to look away. A jogger who had passed by once circled back, slowing down until he finally stopped completely just a few feet away. A child who had been restless a moment earlier sat down on the grass, eyes fixed on the man's moving hands. A couple who'd been deep in conversation paused to listen. The melody wasn't loud, but it carried something gentle that touched people without warning. The man sat with a posture that wasn't stiff or formal. It was relaxed, almost familiar, like someone returning to something they once knew well. His shoulders moved slightly with the rhythm, and his eyes were half closed as if he was letting his emotions guide him more than his hands. He played a simple tune at first, each note spaced just far enough apart to let people breathe it in. The park, normally filled with chatter and noise during mornings, felt unusually peaceful. Even the birds seemed to quiet down, listening to the soft melody drifting through the air. With every passing moment, more people stopped to watch. The sound wasn't perfect. Some notes wavered, Others sounded a bit tired, but there was something real in the way he played, something honest that didn't need perfection to feel beautiful. A teenager whispered to a friend, "How is he making it sound like that?" Her friend only shrugged, too focused on the music to answer. Nearby, an older man removed his cap out of respect, not because he knew the player, but because the music felt like something worth honoring. The melody slowly grew fuller. The man's hands became more confident, his fingers gliding with smooth ease across the keys. People watching him could see the years of practice hidden in those movements, even if they didn't know anything about his past. They saw the way his fingertips tapped lightly, the way his wrists softened into each note, the way his back straightened slightly when he entered a more emotional part of the melody. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Maybe he used to play somewhere." Another answered quietly, "He looks like he's played all his life." And though no one could say for sure, everyone felt there was something deeper behind the way he touched the keys. The man didn't look at the audience. He didn't try to impress them. He didn't exaggerate or show off. His expression stayed soft, almost peaceful. But beneath that peace was a faint spark. Something emotional. Something that suggested the music meant more to him than anyone realized. A few moments later, the melody grew richer. He played faster now, letting his fingers dance across the keys with a quiet confidence that surprised everyone. The old piano, despite its broken keys and aging frame, seemed to respond eagerly. It was as if it had been waiting for someone who understood it, someone who knew how to bring out the soft beauty hidden beneath its flaws. People who had been passing by from the far side of the park began to drift toward the sound. Some came with slow steps, curious. Others came quickly, drawn by something they couldn't quite explain. A mother pushing a stroller whispered, "It sounds lovely," and she paused under a tree to listen. The man shifted gently on the bench as he played, adjusting slightly, completely absorbed in the moment. The sun filtered through the trees above him, casting moving shadows on the piano's surface. A light breeze brushed across the park, carrying the melody along with it. The sound wasn't grand like a concert performance, nor was it technical for the sake of technique. It was simple, emotional, and deeply human. And because of that, it reached people in a way they didn't expect. The group that had laughed earlier felt embarrassed now. One of them rubbed the back of their neck, pretending to focus on something else, but their eyes stayed on the man. Another shifted uneasily, feeling guilty for judging him so quickly. Still, the man seemed completely unaware of their earlier doubts. Or maybe he just didn't care. His focus was on the keys, on the music, on whatever memories or feelings the melody brought back to him. At one point, he slowed down again, letting the melody soften to almost a whisper. It felt like a sigh, a gentle pause in the middle of something meaningful. The audience held their breath without even realizing they were doing it. Then, he let the melody shift again, this time into something with more depth. His fingers moved with purpose, shaping each note like someone painting with delicate strokes. Even the uneven keys blended naturally into the flow. A man from the crowd murmured, This is not normal playing." Someone else nodded slowly, whispering, "He must have learned from somewhere." More eyes watched from farther away. A bicyclist stopped near the bushes and leaned on his bike, listening quietly. A woman sitting on a blanket nearby set down her book and turned fully toward the piano. A street vendor pushing a small cart paused mid-step, mesmerized. The man's expression shifted slightly as the melody reached a deeper part. His brows softened, and his mouth curved into a faint, almost sad smile. Anyone watching closely could sense that he wasn't just playing notes. He was telling a story, one without words, one that people felt without understanding why. The melody rose gently, not in a dramatic way, but with warmth that made people feel something inside their chest. A tune that carried a mix of longing and peace. A tune that felt like someone remembering something important. The longer he played, the more the crowd grew. People moved closer to hear better. A few took quiet steps toward the front of the gathering, trying not to disturb the moment. A child sat cross-legged on the grass, leaning forward with wide eyes. The bench under the man squeaked occasionally, but he didn't seem bothered. The wind brushed his hair gently. The sunlight made soft patterns on the piano keys, and the shadows around him made the scene feel almost like a moment frozen in time. As the melody shifted into a brighter tone, a soft smile appeared on his face. The music became lighter, almost playful. People felt a subtle change, sensing that the man was sharing a small piece of joy from somewhere inside him. And then, almost without warning, he slowed down again. His hands rested lightly on the keys. The music softened into something warm and comforting. It was the kind of moment that made people close their eyes for a second just to feel it. Someone in the crowd whispered, "I didn't expect this." Another responded quietly, "Me neither." The final note of that part of the melody faded slowly into the morning air. For a moment the park was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the world had paused just to let that final sound settle. Before anyone could say anything, the man lifted his hands again and shifted his fingers into a new position. It was clear he wasn't finished. He had more to share, more to express. And the people around him, whether they had laughed at him or ignored him at first, now waited with their full attention. Something had changed inside them. Something gentle. Something open. The old piano, dusty and forgotten for so long, had suddenly become the center of the park. And the man who played it, once doubted and underestimated, had become the quiet heartbeat of that morning. Everyone could feel it, and they had no idea how much more powerful the moment was about to become. The melody continued flowing from the old piano, and with each passing minute, the crowd felt more drawn into the moment. People who had come to the park for a quick walk or a simple break from their routines now stood still, unable to pull themselves away. The man's hands moved with quiet confidence, telling a story that no one fully understood but everyone felt. As the music shifted into a deeper tone, something changed in the expressions of a few people watching. There was a certain familiarity in the sound, a style they had heard somewhere before. One older listener narrowed his eyes slightly as if trying to remember something. He whispered to a woman beside him, "This sounds like someone who's played on stage before. Someone who used to perform." She nodded slowly, listening harder. "It doesn't sound like a beginner at all," she replied. "This is someone who knows what they're doing." More whispers began spreading quietly through the crowd. Even those who didn't fully understand music sensed there was something special about the way he played. The emotion in each note felt too strong to be random, too real to be casual. The man at the piano didn't seem aware of any of this. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes, a softness mixed with a hint of sadness, that became more visible the longer he played. He seemed lost in the music, almost as if he wasn't playing for the crowd at all, but for someone or something only he could see. A soft breeze brushed past him, and some leaves drifted across the ground. The sunlight shifted, creating warm patterns on the piano's old wooden surface. The man continued playing, and the sounds became fuller, richer, more personal. People could sense that the melody was not just a melody, it was a memory. Somewhere in the middle of the tune, his shoulders relaxed even more. His fingers slowed down for a moment, pressing each key gently, almost like he was revisiting something from the past. A few listeners exchanged glances, guessing that the song he played meant something important to him. And they were right. The man's mind drifted quietly to a time long before this morning in the park. Years earlier, he had lived a different kind of life. One filled with music, rehearsals, late nights practicing, and moments on stage when the world felt silent and only the sound of the piano mattered. Back then, he had dreamed of sharing his music with as many people as possible. He had spent countless hours learning every detail of the piano, training his hands to move with precision and emotion. Some days he played until he could barely feel his fingers, and yet he still continued. It wasn't just passion. It was part of who he was. But life has a way of changing direction when people least expect it. There came a time when he had to step away from the world of music. Responsibilities grew heavier, opportunities faded, and suddenly the stage that once felt like home became a distant memory. He had to make choices, hard choices that pulled him away from the piano. Slowly, the applause he once heard turned into silence. The bright lights faded, replaced by long days and quiet nights. The memories of those days stayed with him, even when his hands no longer touched the keys. Sometimes he dreamed about the music he used to play. Other times he woke up remembering the warm glow of stage lights on his face. But most days, he simply kept moving, carrying those memories quietly inside him. Now, sitting at the old park piano, those memories felt close again. As he played, small pieces of his past surfaced in his mind. The faces of people who once listened to him, the smile of someone who had always encouraged him, the excitement he felt whenever he began a new melody. It all blended with the warm morning breeze and the gentle sound of the crowd breathing in his music. A woman standing near the front of the group placed her hand on her heart without realizing it. She felt something in the melody that reminded her of her own memories. Moments she had tried to hold on to, moments life had slowly brushed away. The music didn't just touch the ears of the listeners. It touched something softer inside them. A child pointed at the piano and whispered, "Why does it sound sad?" The adult beside the child replied quietly, "Sometimes people play what they feel." The man's fingers moved with more emotion now, not louder, but deeper. Each note felt like it carried a piece of his story. A story no one there knew yet, but one that was becoming clearer with every second he played. Someone in the crowd pulled out their phone and began recording, sensing that this was not just a simple performance. Maybe they didn't know what made the moment so special, but they could feel it. Another person leaned forward, whispering, "He must have gone through something. You can hear it in the way he plays." The man at the piano shifted into a softer melody, something gentle and full of longing. His eyes glistened slightly, though he didn't stop playing. To him, the music wasn't just a performance, it was a way of speaking without words. Each sound felt like a quiet confession. In the crowd, an older listener closed his eyes. "This reminds me of someone who used to play in the city years ago," he murmured to a friend. The friend tilted their head, listening harder. "Do you think it could be him?" The first man shrugged slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's someone else who had dreams like that." But as the music grew more emotional, it gave the feeling that the man at the piano had indeed lived a life full of melodies, both joyful and painful. His memories continued to flow, late nights practicing alone, melodies he had composed but never shared. The quiet moments when he felt that music was the only thing that understood him. He remembered the applause from distant years, the encouragement from someone who had believed in him deeply, the pride he once felt when he made a room full of people fall silent. He also remembered the moment he walked away from all of it. For a long time, he wondered if he had made the right choice. Some days he believed he had. Other days it felt like he had lost a part of himself. But life doesn't always give people the chance to go back. Until now. As he played on the old park piano, surrounded by strangers who had stopped their morning routines just to listen, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of belonging. A quiet reminder that music still lived inside him. The melody softened again, becoming almost fragile. His fingers trembled just slightly, not from weakness but from emotion. The people nearby noticed the change, leaning forward instinctively. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt. It was in this quiet moment that the listeners felt the truth. The man wasn't just playing a random melody. He was sharing something personal, something he had carried quietly for years. And without meaning to, he had invited everyone in the park into that part of his life. A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes gently. Another person swallowed hard, feeling unexpectedly emotional. Even those who didn't understand the technical beauty of the music felt the weight of it, the honesty, the depth. When the man shifted into a slightly brighter melody again, it felt like he was letting go of some of that weight. The crowd felt it too, as if they were breathing out after holding something heavy inside. The old piano creaked under his touch, but the sound that came out was full, warm, and alive. It was the kind of moment that people don't forget easily, the kind that stays with them long after the music ends. And though none of them knew his name or his story yet, they could sense that the man sitting at the piano had lived a life far richer and more emotional than his simple appearance suggested. The melody continued, telling his story wordlessly, and the crowd listened, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of quiet respect. None of them knew that this was only the beginning of the most unforgettable part of his life, a moment that would change everything for him and for everyone watching. Here is the continuation written in simple, natural, human-centric English without headings or restricted names. The moment he finished the last note from the previous scene, the air in the park felt different. It was as if everyone who stood there was trying to understand what they had just witnessed. But part 4 begins with a shift, a new kind of energy that grows around him even though he doesn't notice it at first. He is still lost in the world of music, still caught between the past he lived and the moment happening right in front of him. A young person nearby quietly lifted a phone and began recording. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. Something about the way he played made them feel that people beyond the park needed to hear it too. Another person followed, then another, until half the crowd had their phones raised without speaking a word. Even then, no one interrupted him. They were afraid that even a small noise might break something magical. The man sat there with his fingers slightly curved, touching the keys with a lightness that didn't match the weight of the emotions he carried. His back was straight but relaxed, like someone who had learned long ago that music required both discipline and surrender. When he closed his eyes, it was clear he wasn't seeing the park anymore. He wasn't seeing the crowd, the trees, or the birds moving around the branches. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere built from memories only he understood. A woman in the crowd whispered softly, almost afraid her voice might disturb the music. She said she felt like she knew the story behind those notes, even without hearing a single word from him. A man next to her nodded as if the two of them were sharing a private moment of understanding. It was that kind of performance, the kind that connected strangers without them even knowing each other's names. He moved into a new tune, one that sounded softer at first. It was gentle, almost shy, like something he hadn't played in a long time. The melody grew slowly, rising and falling like waves hitting the sand. Every pause felt meaningful, and every note that followed felt earned. The old piano suddenly didn't sound old anymore. The cracks in the wood, the faded paint, the keys that stuck sometimes. None of it mattered. Under his hands, the piano sounded young again, full of life. People walking by stopped as soon as they heard the sound. A cyclist rolled to a slow halt, leaning on the handlebar to listen. A street vendor turned down the little radio playing behind him so he could hear better. A jogger pulled out an earbud, stunned by how much clearer the piano sounded than the music playing in her ears. The park had always been a busy place, but right now it felt like everything had paused, just for him. He didn't notice the growing crowd. He didn't see the phones recording or the expressions forming on each face. For him, this moment was nothing more than a chance to breathe again, to let out everything he had held inside for so long. Music had always been his way of speaking, even during the years when he stopped playing publicly. Words were hard. Life had chipped away at him in ways he never expected. But music stayed with him even in silence. Someone in the crowd whispered, asking if he was famous. Another person shrugged and said it didn't matter. They felt something deeper than fame. They felt honesty, vulnerability, and a kind of strength that didn't need loud words or big gestures. Every note he played was enough. As he continued, the tune shifted again, this time larger and fuller. His fingers moved faster, not in a rushed way, but in a way that showed confidence returning to him. The melody grew so rich that even the birds perched above seemed to stop their chatter. A few leaves drifted down from the trees, floating slowly, almost like they were moving to the rhythm of the music. The wind picked up lightly, brushing across the piano keys and the pages of a small notebook someone had left on a nearby bench. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, landing on the man's hands as if trying to highlight every movement he made. The crowd felt it too. This wasn't just a performance. It was a release, an opening, a moment he might not have planned but desperately needed. A small child stepped forward, holding one parent's hand. The child stared at the piano with wide eyes, mesmerized. The parent knelt beside the child and whispered that this was what passion looked like. They said that sometimes people carry gifts inside them for years, waiting for the right moment to share them again. The man reached the heart of his performance then. The tune he played wasn't from any book or sheet. It wasn't something he practiced or prepared. It was the kind of music that came from living. Every hardship, every small joy, every disappointment, every lesson. His fingers moved like they had stories of their own to tell. Someone near the back of the crowd felt tears forming and wiped them quickly, hoping no one noticed. But someone else nearby was already crying too, overwhelmed by how deeply the music touched them. A few people exchanged glances, realizing they were all feeling something similar. The recording phones captured everything. The shifting expressions, the quiet awe, the way the entire park seemed to fall into a perfect moment of stillness. Then he played the final piece. This one began quietly, barely louder than a breath. The soft notes floated through the air with a warmth that felt comforting. Slowly, the melody grew stronger, almost like a reminder that even when life becomes heavy, there is still something beautiful waiting to rise. The crowd leaned in without moving forward. It was an instinctive pull, like they didn't want to miss even the smallest sound. The final notes arrived gently. They didn't explode or spread dramatically. Instead, they landed softly, like footsteps on fresh snow. When he lifted his hands off the keys, the silence that followed was complete. No one clapped yet. No one spoke. They were still absorbing what they had just heard. Finally, someone began to applaud. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. Then it grew louder as more people joined in. The sound spread across the park like a wave. People who had just arrived clapped too, even though they didn't know exactly what happened. The man looked up then, startled by how many people stood around him. His eyes widened slightly as he realized the size of the crowd. He blinked a few times, adjusting to the noise and the attention. His mouth curved into a shy smile, almost like he didn't know what to do next. He nodded gently at the crowd, a small gesture of gratitude. The applause grew even stronger. And in that simple, humble moment, the same man who had been laughed at earlier in the day became someone unforgettable. The recording phones captured everything, and by the next morning, those videos would begin spreading far beyond the park, starting the journey that would change his life. But for now, he just sat quietly, letting the applause wash over him, unaware of the history he had just begun to make. The applause from the crowd slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed in the air like a warm echo. People continued standing around the old piano even after the man stepped back, almost as if they were waiting for something else to happen. Some of them whispered to each other about the way he played, trying to describe the feeling his music gave them. Others simply stood in silence, still caught in the moment. The man looked down at his hands, the same hands he had doubted for so long. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the emotion of returning to something he thought he had lost forever. For a moment, he just let himself breathe, taking in the sight of people smiling at him instead of laughing. He stepped away from the piano and began walking toward a nearby bench. He didn't expect anyone to follow, but a few people did, not out of curiosity but with genuine kindness. Someone asked if he played professionally. Someone else asked where he learned. He gave small answers, shy but polite. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and he didn't know how to handle all the kindness coming his way. A young man approached him with a bright expression and said he had recorded the entire performance. He asked if it was okay to post it online. The pianist blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. He had never imagined anyone would want to share his music like that. After a moment, he nodded gently, not fully understanding how much that simple nod would change things. Within minutes, the video was uploaded. The young man added a caption describing the scene in the park, how the pianist had walked up to the old piano, how people had laughed, and how everything changed the moment he began to play. The video began spreading, first among the people who were there, then to others they knew. But the man didn't think about any of that. He stayed in the park for a while, sitting quietly and watching people go by. His mind was full of memories, some painful, some hopeful. He thought about the years he hadn't played for anyone, the years he spent believing his music didn't matter. And now here he was, sitting alone after a performance he never planned, while a crowd of strangers talked about how deeply he touched their hearts. As the sun began to lower, he stood up and approached the old piano again. He brushed the surface with his hand, feeling the worn wood under his fingertips. Even though the piano was aged and imperfect, it had given him a voice today. And because of that, he felt a strange kind of gratitude. He placed one hand on the piano like he was thanking it. Before leaving, he played one last short tune, soft, simple, almost like a goodbye for the day. A few people nearby noticed and paused to listen. When he finished, he offered them a small smile, then walked away quietly. That night, everything changed. By the time he reached home, the video had already begun spreading fast. People shared it with their friends, commenting on how emotional the performance was. Some viewers said they cried. Others said the music felt like a reminder of something they had forgotten in their own lives. The caption, "He made history today," appeared on several posts where people shared the video. The man didn't know any of this. He sat in his small living space, eating a simple meal, unaware that his face and his music were being watched by thousands of people online. After dinner, he rested on his couch with his eyes closed, feeling tired but peaceful in a way he hadn't felt for years. The next morning, everything came rushing in. He woke up to dozens of messages. Some were from people he hadn't heard from in years. Others were from strangers who had somehow found his contact information through mutual friends or community pages. They all said the same thing: they loved his music. They wanted him to keep playing. Confused, he checked his phone and saw the video. It had gone viral overnight. Hundreds of thousands of views. Thousands of comments. People from other countries writing long messages about how his performance touched them. He sat still, staring at the screen, unable to move for several seconds. He read comment after comment, each one lifting him a little higher, filling the spaces inside him that had been empty for so long. Then came a message from a local news reporter asking for an interview. A well-known music school wanted to invite him to speak to their students. A community center reached out, offering him a chance to perform at their weekend event. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. The man placed the phone down and walked to the small window. The morning sunlight filtered in, bright and gentle. For the first time in years, he felt something heavy lift from his chest. He finally understood that the world still had room for his music. He returned to the park that afternoon. When people recognized him, they smiled and waved. A few approached him with gratitude in their eyes. A small child even handed him a drawing they made of him sitting at the old piano. He accepted it with a soft laugh, holding the picture gently like it was something precious. Someone asked if he would play again. He hesitated at first, overwhelmed by how quickly everything had changed. But then he looked at the piano, the same aged instrument that had waited there all this time, and he felt something warm inside him. He sat down. The wood felt familiar now. The keys felt like old friends he had finally found again. When he began to play, the crowd gathered much faster than the day before. This time there was no laughter, no judgment, no doubt. Only anticipation. His music filled the air again, carrying the story of a man who lost something, found it again in the most unexpected place, and shared it with the world without meaning to. People watched him with admiration, but more importantly, with respect. Every note he played felt like a bridge between the person he had been and the person he was becoming. By the end of the performance, a new kind of silence filled the park. Not the stunned silence from the first day, but a peaceful one. A silence that felt like appreciation. He stood up and bowed lightly as people clapped, but his smile was different now. Softer, stronger, more sure of itself. When he walked away from the piano, he didn't feel small or forgotten. He felt seen. He felt hopeful. He felt like he had stepped into a new chapter without even realizing it. The same park-goers who had laughed at him once now looked at him with admiration. The same old piano that many ignored had become a piece of local history because of the music he shared. And the same man who once felt invisible was now inspiring thousands of people. His journey wasn't over, but he didn't need to know where it was leading. For the first time in a long time, he just felt ready for whatever came next. And all of it began with one simple question spoken softly in a park. "Can I play that aged piano?"